Hello, folks. I decided I was going to create a Q&A video because I've been getting asked a lot of questions and I haven't been really up to date on answering them. So rather than just trying to go through each old video and try to give a text-based response, I figured it might be a good idea to just do a verbal response using this video to just answer some of the questions I've been asked as they pertain to some of the subjects I've been covering, as well as some of the subjects that I haven't covered, just so I can help satiate whatever curiosity you guys have. So I'm going to go ahead and start, and the first question I got was about concealers. I was asked, do you use concealers, and what do I think about concealers in general? So what concealers are, they come in usually like spray or powder forms. You can buy them at like some cosmetic stores, but usually you have to find them online based on your location. And some of the more popular brands would include Topic, Kabuki, Derm Match, and they all have their pros and cons. And yes, I do occasionally use them, as I think they do work pretty well. They can give your hair a lot more volume. You can kind of think of them as like makeup for your hair. They do have some major drawbacks, and they definitely aren't for everybody. So who do I think should use concealers? The best candidate for concealers are any individual who has diffuse thinning. Now, for the people who don't know what diffuse thinning is, that's when you don't have hair loss in a typical like male pattern baldness fashion, where you're losing hair at the vertex and then the crown, and then eventually the two of them meet. It's rather when you're just kind of losing hair all over, because you'll still have hair all over your head. It'll just be kind of thin and worn out a little bit. But the cool thing about concealers like Topic and Kabuki specifically is that they bind to the hair follicle, and they just make it look thicker, so they can make a very diffuse, thinning head of hair look like a full head of hair. Now, one thing I do want to say, one second, if your issue is with the hairline, then you probably don't want to rely on Kabuki or Topic, because they just look like absolute shit on the hairline. I know they do have like things where like you can like kind of put like this comb looking device over your hairline and spray, and it's supposed to help or anything, but it's just going to look like a powdery mess. And worst of all is that if you're using something like or any concealer for that matter, it may get in the way of using topicals. And that's all the more reason why I recommend that you try to avoid topicals if possible and just stick with finasteride, so you can actually reap the benefits of these concealers, because I feel that these things work well even on people who don't have male pattern baldness, because they just make the hair look thicker and more cosmetically pleasing. But since I do use topicals, I use RU5841 and I use Minoxidil, I very seldom use it. And if I'm going to use something for my hairline, rather than Topic or Kabuki, what works much better is Derm Match. Now, Derm Match is a little bit different. It's actually a liquid as opposed to a powder, and it's something you have like a little brush, and you can kind of paint it on the front of your scalp, and it kind of makes the thinning hair on the front of your hair blended better with a thicker hair and back. So it's not perfect, but it certainly looks better, and I think that in some settings it doesn't work. Like if you're in a very brightly lit area, it's going to look pretty obvious. But if like you go to like a very dingy lit area like a bar or like a club, you could probably get away with using a concealer for your hairline like Derm Match. But in general, I say that they're good, but only if you're not using a topical, because topicals have to be used daily, and you probably don't want to have to take multiple showers per day. It's just going to fry your hair, especially if you're using like a really potent shampoo like Nizoral. I don't necessarily recommend Nizoral for hair loss. I don't think it's very effective, but it is a very good anti-dandruff shampoo, and dandruff shampoos in general can be pretty harsh on the hair, so having to like go through that inconvenience I don't think is worth it. But the answer to the question simply is that yes, I do occasionally use concealers, and I think they're good. They have their drawbacks, but I mean, give them a try if you want. All right. Next question is relates to a video I created about turning minoxidil foam into liquid. It was, will heating minoxidil foam to a liquid ruin its potency? And the answer is no, because all you're doing is that you're basically bringing it up to room temperature. Like when it sprays out, it's in a foam, and when it touches the skin, like when it touches the scalp, it'll already turn into a liquid. Like your body heat will turn the foam into a liquid, so you're just turning it into a liquid before it touches the scalp, so you can apply it more easily. Because the issue with minoxidil foam is that it tends to get too much of it gets lost on the hair, and you want to get it on the scalp. and you want to have the benefits of liquid minoxidil without the inconvenience of liquid minoxidil, because anyone who's used liquid minoxidil will tell you it's a major pain in the ass to use because it takes like 4 hours to dry. Frankly, I think it could actually take even a little bit longer than that. And if you use it at night, it can get into your pillow. It gives you kind of that greasy hair-like appearance. Definitely not a good thing. But the cool thing about minoxidil foam is that it doesn't have as much propylene glycol in it. It dries very quickly. Some people even say it works a little bit better. I don't know about that. I think it's about the same, frankly. But I think that it's a much more effective method of using minoxidil. For those people who don't know how to do it, all you have to do is that you just have to take a hair dryer, turn the heat on, and just like fill up a cap full of minoxidil foam and just kind of melt it down. Or if you don't have a hair dryer, you can just take a bowl of warm water or hot water and just fill up the cap with foam minoxidil, stick it in, and it'll turn to liquid. Then you can use like one of those droppers that comes with liquid minoxidil, and then you can easily put it on your scalp that way. And I find that's a much more effective method of using it compared to liquid minoxidil. The only drawback is that the foam, at least where I live in the Colorado, the United States, tends to be a little bit more expensive, and that's the case too in the UK where they sell it as Regain. And I think there are generic variants that are available in Europe as well. But always go for the generic if possible. There's no benefit to using like brand name products. They're all made in the same laboratory. So just if you can get it from like Walgreens, Target, Costco, CVS Pharmacy, a place like that, that's always a preferable option. But as I've told people before, though, if you are new to hair loss, I do not recommend minoxidil because its mechanism of action is different from finasteride. And since it's different, that means anything you get from minoxidil will require minoxidil. So you can't like start with minoxidil, then switch over to finasteride, because everything you gain from minoxidil will fall off, because we understand the mechanism of action of finasteride. It suppresses DHT, but minoxidil is a little bit more enigmatic. So it's something that that works, and it can actually work like as an effective adjunct treatment. But if you can get away with just using finasteride, that's much more convenient because it's very simple just to take a pill and forget about it, and then be on with your day. So yeah, avoid minoxidil if you can. But if you do use it, if you're currently using it, I think that's the best way to use it. Okay, this actually, I think I already answered this, but I'll go ahead and answer it yet again. If I had to use just one hair loss drug, what would it be? It would definitely be finasteride, just because I think it's the chances of side effects are extremely low. It works very well, and I think that for like 90% of people, it's good as a standalone treatment. And I think a big mistake a lot of people make with finasteride is that they just they'll use it for like 1 or 2 months, and they'll get that initial shed, and they don't understand that what's happening is that your hair follicles are actually shedding the weaker, older follicles to replace them with stronger, thicker follicles. So that initial shedding is usually a sign that a treatment is working. And when people first start a treatment and you start shedding, that may seem paradoxical, but that's a sign that the drug is working right there. And like, I didn't get a shed from finasteride, but that's because I had already been using minoxidil for a while by the time I used it. But finasteride definitely did help. And unfortunately, I don't really have the option of only using finasteride right now, because I also rely on minoxidil. So I know if I were to stop minoxidil and just use finasteride, I would lose quite a bit of hair. How much? I don't know. I don't want to find out, because hair loss scares the shit out of me. But certainly, in retrospect, if I could go back in time, to my 20s, I would just go ahead and use finasteride for sure, because that's just a much better standalone treatment, and I've had no negative side effects of it at all. So yeah, definitely start with finasteride. I'd recommend, of course, talk to your doctor about that, but try to go for Proscar, because that's the 5 milligram tablet that's prescribed for BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia, and quarter that, so it's 1.25 milligrams, and that's much cheaper. I get my prescription from the Target pharmacy, and it only cost me $9 a month. Very, very cheap. It's like negligible price right there. All right. So the next question also pertains to finasteride. It's I want to start using finasteride, but I'm scared to use it because of all the horror stories I've heard from websites like Propecia Help. What should I do to build up my courage? Well, first of all, I would disregard all the bullshit anecdotal arguments that people are using on those websites. A lot of them are financially motivated. They're pursuing lawsuits. In fact, if you go to those websites like Propecia Help, they actually have lawyers advertise on that website saying, "Let us help you sue Merck," or "Let us help you sue your pharmacist so you can get rich." So a lot of these people are just looking to make a quick buck. They're deliberately exaggerating the side effects. There's no mechanistic data whatsoever that shows that finasteride has any irreversible side effects. Now, people do get side effects with finasteride. It's about 2%, but the side effects will go away if you stop using it. There's something in our body called homeostasis. Anyone who's taken a 6th grade biology class is probably familiar with that term. But the idea is that our body has the way of has the means of like upregulating itself. So that means that if like DHT is being suppressed in the body and we stop using it, our body will return its DHT back to its normal levels. And if for some reason you damage like if you damage your endocrine system, which there is really no evidence of, like for example, people who use steroids, they could actually damage their endocrine system if they are not careful. They don't do proper post-cycle therapy. They can still just go on testosterone replacement therapy and get their endocrine levels back to normal. So even if like for some reason you did get some persistent side effects with finasteride, you can easily solve it by just going on testosterone replacement therapy. Now that's not a perfect solution, of course, because all medicine has its share of risk. But the idea that something is completely irreversible is just completely fallacious. And another thing I'll point out about the members of Propecia Help Forum, if you look at these guys, these are some of like the saddest, most pathetic bunch of incels you can ever imagine. We're talking about people who have never stepped foot in the gym in their entire life, people who are either diabetic, pre-diabetic. A lot of these people have cardiovascular issues, and all these health problems can contribute to erectile dysfunction. So there's a very good chance that these people already had issues with erectile dysfunction due to their health problems. And, it's either that finasteride made it a little bit worse or it made them more conscientious of the problem because of all the problems they've heard with it. And it's best just to ignore that bullshit and just take the finasteride and like an aspirin and forget about it, because I'm a firm believer in the nocebo effect. And the nocebo effect, for those who don't know, is like the opposite of placebo. The idea that if you really, really think something negative is going to happen, then something negative will happen. So it's very important just to ignore that bullshit. And also another thing I'll mention is that if you want to like rely on anecdotal studies, there's like reports of sexual dysfunction occurring with almost every drug. Anti-anxiety drugs, pain medication, even over-the-counter pain medications, antidepressants for sure, big-time antidepressants. And some of those are valid, but not everybody gets side effects. Just in the same way how not everybody's going to get results from finasteride. And you'd think that if these like side effects from finasteride were permanent, then the beneficial effect for finasteride, which is hair growth, would remain as well, but that doesn't for some reason. So it's all just a bunch of bullshit. And keep in mind that these people, as boisterous and vocal as they are in the extreme minority. So don't take what they say seriously. You're going to really, really regret it if you wait too long and you lose all your hair, because there comes a point eventually where not even a hair transplant can save you. And if finasteride does not work for you, remember, there are alternatives you can use as well. They're not recommended. They're experimental. Keep that in mind. I am not endorsing them, but there are experimental anti-androgens that people can use, like RU5841. That's what I use for my research subject, and there's others as well. I'm not going to provide a direct source. I don't want you guys to try that unless you try finasteride first, and after 6 months you decide it's not for you. But I just want to lay it out there. There are other options, and there's other options on the way as well, like CB, that are going to be available by prescription that will be for hair loss. So keep in mind, like, people who say that like this pill finasteride's our only option, that's just not true. It's the best option that we have at the moment, but it's not the only option. So just keep that in mind. All right. Okay. I'm thinking about starting a light steroid cycle. What would you recommend as a good stack? Okay, just don't. There is no such thing as a good steroid stack. I mean, I don't want to say like just absolutely do not and everything, but a few things I'll say about steroids is that the interesting thing about steroids is that the older you are, the better. I mean, I'm turning 38 this year, so in just a couple months, so maybe a good case could be made for me to use it, although I never would because I'm scared of hair loss. But because the older you are, like, your testosterone just naturally decreases over time, so you're just going to be replacing more of the testosterone you lost normally. So the idea is that you're getting your testosterone back to like the levels it were when you're 18. But if you're talking about like an actual like full-blown ergogenic steroid cycle, where you're using like say 500 milligrams of test per week, maybe some like oral steroids as well, then you can get like your androgen levels 4, 8, 12, 16 times higher than they are at a really high super physiological levels. And that's really not recommended under any circumstances if you're trying to fight hair loss, because if you have the male pattern baldness gene, then just your own natural testosterone production is going to likely cause hair loss if you're not using some remedy like finasteride. So you can imagine how hard it would be if you were to like quadruple or even do more to your androgen levels, because testosterone in high levels will convert more to DHT. So even if you're taking something like finasteride, a lot of that testosterone will still convert into DHT, because finasteride, dutasteride do not suppress 100% of your DHT. So I don't recommend any steroid cycle, but if you are going to go on a steroids, if you absolutely insist on doing it, then throw the entire kitchen sink at the table. That means use like dutasteride, like that's stronger than finasteride. Use a topical anti-androgen, and use minoxidil even. I mean, it may suck having to use minoxidil, but you want to throw everything you have at it, because, let's face it, you're going to need all the help you can get. And as far as the specific steroids, there is no such thing as a hair-safe steroid. I hate it when people bring up, like, Anavar and, like, some oral steroids. No, most of those oral steroids are DHT-based, and there is no androgen that's hair-safe. Even testosterone is not hair-safe. I mean, there is evidence that testosterone has a necrotic effect on the hair follicles. It's only about 1/8 as bad as DHT, but even testosterone alone isn't good for the hair follicles. But if you are going to use steroids, the safest thing to do would be to use just like a 500 milligram once a week shot of like of testosterone cypionate or anathenate, because that's just a synthetic version of the testosterone our body produces naturally. So finasteride and other alpha 5 reductase inhibitors like dutasteride should work. If you are going to use an oral steroid, which I really do not recommend, because they're not just because of hair loss, but also because they're very bad for the liver, and they're also just very bad for the cardiovascular system. They tend to have a very negative effect on cholesterol levels. Then you definitely want to use a topical anti-androgen, because the thing is that they don't actually convert to DHT. They're already DHT based in many cases, so finasteride won't do shit in that case. So make sure you use something to suppress the androgens locally on the scalp. But really, I mean, like, I think there's a lot of people who jump into steroids, they're doing it prematurely. I mean, if you've been like lifting for like 5-10 years and you just can't get stronger for whatever reason, then maybe there's a good case to be made for it. But even then, you have to consider your health. I mean, why do you want to use steroids? Are you trying to get stronger? I mean, maybe you just need to eat more food. Maybe you need to change up your program a little bit. I mean, how important is getting as strong as possible to you? I mean, are you being offered a multi-million contract for like a team sport, and you become like a professional baseball player, an Olympic weightlifter? I mean, what is the incentive behind it? I mean, it's up to you to decide whether or not the risk is worth the rewards. Personally, for me, I don't think the risks are worth it. It goes beyond just hair loss, but that's just something you have to be conscientious of and think really hard about, and really make sure that you're at a point where you don't think you can gain more strength naturally before you choose that. Like if you're in your early 20s and you've just been listening for a couple years and you're frustrated because your bench is at 225, then just fuck that. Just train harder. Don't fuck up your endocrine system. You can still gain strength without using steroids. All right. Okay, a fitness question right here. I have trouble hitting maximum depth on my squat. Any pointers? This was asked on my squat video. I tend to squat very deep, and I thought I'd give my reasons for that. I mean, I do not think you have to squat as deeply as I do to get the benefits out of the squat. You just need to squat deeply enough in order to get as much of a stretch reflex on the hip extensors, the glutes, and the hamstrings, so that all the torque, all that rotational force isn't shifting on the knees and the quadriceps. So I think you should go below parallel. But the reason why I squat all the way down, I squat until my hamstrings touch my calves. And, a lot of times I'll even pause for a little bit. And the reason why is just because I like the workout it gives me, and also because I got sick of having to worry about, like, with like every squat, whether I'm doing like a front or back squat, I'm like, is this deep enough? Is this deep enough? No, I just go all the way down, and then I have this cue where I feel my hamstrings touch my calves, and that tells me I'm going deep enough. Now, if you're having trouble hitting depth, there's a few factors that could be causing that, and I think that the most common is poor ankle flexibility, poor dorsiflexion, and that's just the ability of your, like, let's see, your toes to touch your shins, and you can work on that by just doing heavy squats with a narrow stance. And if you feel like your feet are turning outward or your ankles are like are lifting off the floor, then it's possible you just need to hinge, push your hips back a little bit more. But there's a lot of stretches you can do for that. I mean, you can look at them easily. But my favorite one is placing the barbell directly on top of my knees, because that kind of like forces my ankles down, and just going to a full squat position and just pushing my knees forward as much as possible. And that's a good way to stretch out my ankles. And if dorsiflexion is not the problem, another issue is that your posterior chain muscles, the glutes and the hamstrings, might be too weak. And you can usually tell and see this in individuals if like they have an excessive lordotic curve in the lumbar spine, because what happened is that they're having this anterior pelvic tilt where their weight is kind of just shifting forward into their quadriceps. And there's a lot of assistance work you can do for the hamstrings and the glutes that can help with that. I hate doing assistance work, but if you have to do it, some good exercises would be glute ham raises are very good. Even hip thrusters. I know I have a video where I bash hip thrusters, and I stand by all that. I recommend watching that video. But even that's a good video to kind of like isolate the posterior chain. And, just doing more squats, and also stiff leg deadlifts are very good. Deficit deadlifts are good. Let's see, weighted step ups where you just like step up into a box. That's a good assistance move you can do to it, just to strengthen the posterior chain. And doing those in conjunction with squats. Now, keep in mind, maximum depth means different things for different people. Maximum depth just means as deep as hip flexibility, strength, and body awareness allows for you. So even if you can't squat like all the way down, you want to squat down as deeply as you can go. And as you gradually work on hip mobility, you can go down deeper, deeper, deeper. But make sure you refine your form before adding a whole bunch of weight, because you don't want to be that douchebag at the gym that's quarter squatting like 405 for reps and thinking he's tough shit. All right. Okay, another fitness question. What is a good rep set range for building muscle and strength? Now, there really is no such thing as a good rep set range. I mean, if there were, everybody would be doing it. If you look at the guidelines from sports medicine organizations like the American College of Sports Medicine and National Strength and Conditioning Association, they typically recommend 6 reps or fewer for building strength. Although really, any kind of program where you can apply progressive overload will build strength and build muscle, because building muscle is a side effect of building strength. And what does that mean? That means adding some new dynamic to your program on a basis as frequently as you can allow, whether it be like a week-by-week mesocycle basis or a microcycle basis, or a microcycle basis, week by week or month by month. I mean, you don't really even have to periodize like that, though. You just need to like do something that's going to tax the nervous system and the human movement system in a new way every week. So what do I mean by that? So that means that even if you're just doing like 8 or 9 reps, which is above like the ideal recommended range for strength, if let's say on week 1, you're squatting 185 pounds for 10 reps, and then on week 4, you're squatting 205 pounds for 10 reps, well, guess what? You've gotten stronger, and that would be reflected in your 1RM max as well, and you don't have to do 1RM max training if you want to get stronger, because there's a difference between demonstrating strength and building a movement, and demonstrating max strength isn't even necessary unless you're going to compete as a powerlifter. And a lot of times for very technical movements like the squat and the deadlift, it's actually, for a lot of people, it's not really a good idea to do like 1RM max attempts, because there's a much greater chance of just motor pattern breakdown and injury. So if you want to do like max attempts, fine. But if you want to train at reps, fine, do that as well. But just so long as you can do something that makes the movement more challenging, whether it be adding more reps, adding more sets, adding more weights, that works. So don't stress like, which program should I do? Should I do Smolov? Should I do starting strength? Definitely don't do starting strength, because Mark Rippetoe's an idiot. Should I do Strongless 5x5? Not all those programs work. All of them work. All of them are good programs, really. Really, you can follow whatever one you want, but just so long as you're training the movements that you want to train, like let's say the squat, deadlift, bench, like overhead press, pull-ups, you're training them frequently, and you're doing things to make them more challenging, then you absolutely will get stronger. So yeah, don't even worry about like the rep set range. Just get your ass to the gym and fucking train. All right. Why did I stop dutasteride? This is a good question I get a lot. I was using dutasteride for a good while, but I ended up just stopping. I have a few issues with the drug. Now, it wasn't side effects. I didn't really get any side effects in the drug. If anything, actually, I think my libido increased a little bit. I mean, that may have just been nothing, but I was getting pretty horny on the drug. I'm not someone who has like a super high sex drive to begin with. I think it's pretty normal, but like I was like really, really getting horny when I was on that drug. The girl I was dating at the time, she was getting pretty worn out, in fact. But the issue I had with the drug is that it's a soft gel, and I don't really talk about it too often. It's not like my area of expertise, but I am a vegan. I am an ethical vegan. I have been an ethical vegan since 2003. So I just had some issues with using like a soft gel. Now, I will say one thing about gelatin is that ethically, it's not as morally questionable as like eating skeletal muscle meat, because demand for gelatin, which it comes from like the connective tissue of animals, isn't so high that animals are killed specifically for that product. That's more of like a byproduct of the industry, because animals are killed for their skeletal meat, and like the leftover stuff becomes gelatin. So if you are a vegan, and or if you're thinking about going to vegan, and you are taking like a soft gel drug or something, I'd absolutely continue to take that and everything, because I don't think it actually contributes to animal cruelty, but just something psychologically about it just didn't feel right to me, so I felt like dropping it. And also another issue, this is probably more significant, is that insurance wasn't covering it, because it was being prescribed for hair loss, but it's actually not approved for hair loss. It's for BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia. So I had to pay full price for it. Insurance wouldn't cover it, and that was just money I didn't really have. And I was using finasteride and dutasteride both at the same time. And there is some like evidence that like using them in conjunction can actually be more beneficial than just using dutasteride by itself, since even though dutasteride suppresses about 30% more DHT, there are a couple enzymes that finasteride is slightly more effective at suppressing. So if you want to try like cross combination therapy with finasteride and dutasteride, by all means. I know a lot of people who do that. Just make sure you talk to your doctor about that. But for me, I think finasteride is good enough as an anti-androgen, with the occasional application of RU58841. All right. Here's a question that is a pretty new subject for me. Are you a gamer? If so, what are some games you like? Yes, I am a gamer. I don't like to really associate myself too strongly with gamer culture, just because it's so toxic. But the type of games I like are really story-driven, like hyper-immersive games. And like, for example, I like The Witcher 3. The Witcher 3 is my favorite game of all time. Deus Ex, the Thief series, a lot of those classic PC games, and modern console games that are very story-driven, and just like games that have either a science fiction or medieval setting, and games that give you a lot of player agency, where you get to like, kind of choose the direction of the storyline. Like, the Mass Effect series is really good. I'm not a really big fan of like super competitive online multiplayer games. I'm not a big fan of fighting games either, although I am looking forward to Mortal Kombat 11. Fighting games, I mean, they're fine and everything, but I think they're only fun if you play with people who are of an equal skill level, because otherwise it gets either boring because the person's not good enough, or it gets frustrating because you get your ass handed to you. So, and also another problem I have with fighting games is that they just don't have very much of a story. Although Mortal Kombat, the NetherRealm studio games, are typically better, but I really like games like Witcher 3, because I don't even see them as like escapism. Like Skyrim as well, I see them as like almost like inspiration, because like the characters in the game are like people who like I'd like to almost model myself after. And that doesn't mean I'm gonna like let my hair grow out, turn it white, and become a witcher and start slaying monsters and everything. But I think that they often serve as like good role models for men, like Geralt. He's like strong, he trains, he's smart, he's a good father, and I think that's just kind of a cool thing. Like, cool, he sends like an important message that I think a lot of people can benefit from. And also, I like the Witcher books as well. Very, very good fantasy series, and I'm very excited about the movie series as well. And I'm also a fan of like from software games like Bloodborne, Dark Souls. All those are a lot of fun. I didn't like Sekiro that much, just because I thought the samurai setting was like a little boring. It's like I already played Neo, so we had the samurai setting again, so it wasn't that great. But yeah, I do play games. I mean, I don't know if I consider myself a hardcore gamer, because I just have too many other hobbies I enjoy, but I certainly do like it. Um, okay. Why am I a vegan? Did I have any issues building muscle on a vegan diet? Um, So, okay, that was the whole question. No, I didn't have any issues building muscle on a vegan diet because I started veganism long, long, long before I started working out. I was like, let's see, how old was I when I went vegan? I was like 22. It was like back in 2003, and the reason why I went vegan was, this is going to sound really cheesy, but I remember seeing this documentary from Alec Baldwin called "Meet Your Meat," and it showed the animals that I was consuming on a daily basis, like chicken, cows, pigs, fish, and I saw just the sheer torment and absolute horror they were going through. And I realized that the only like big difference between them and us was just like intelligence. And I did not see that as a sufficient enough justification to continue to support their exploitation and cruelty. And there were things I considered doing before because I was of the firm mindset that meat had essential nutrients in it that I couldn't get from plants. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll try like the grass-fed beef and or like the organic, humanely raised. But upon further research, I realized that demand for meat is far too high for like humane meat to be like a viable ethical solution for the entire planet. And in many cases it's even worse because if you're talking about like an animal that's raised without antibiotics or without growth hormones, that means it's going to take longer to grow, so it's going to need more resources, and it's going to produce more methane. Like I think grass-fed cows, the evidence shows that they produce 3 times more methane. And I'm also a vegan for environmental reasons as well. I'm a firm believer in climate change, and I know methane is an even worse greenhouse gas than CO2. But the good thing about methane is that it's a shorter lifespan. So even though there's a lot of things we can do to improve greenhouse gas emissions, I think going vegan is probably the best thing we can do for short-term benefit, just because it's going to not take nearly as long for methane to clear from the atmosphere as CO2. And we have a population that's approaching like 8 billion, and I think like the estimate is we're going to have like 10 billion people on the planet by the 2050s, and that just makes me really concerned about like agriculture being able to meet the demands of a increasingly hungry population of human beings. So I think that just I'm doing my part as an environmentalist and as someone who's ethically minded by abstaining from meat consumption. And yeah, like I said, I didn't have any trouble building muscle on it. Like everything I've built has been on a vegan diet because I've been a vegan a long time. And I know there's a lot of people who create videos where they fail on a vegan diet. And I think that there's a common trend is that a lot of times they're doing some sort of dietary new age woo woo bullshit, like they're like raw vegan. And I don't recommend raw veganism because if you're abstaining from cooked foods, that means you're not going to be eating like beans, grains, like a lot of starchy foods, and those are very calorically dense. And if you're like an athlete or if you're someone trying to build muscle, you just want to make sure you're getting enough macronutrients in your diet. And it's going to be hard to do that if you're just eating like fruits and green vegetables, which is pretty much all you can eat on like on a raw vegan diet. So I feel that a lot of these people were just malnourished as a result of not eating cooked foods, and they just decided to blame veganism for it for some reason rather than just try a regular vegan diet. And also, I think a lot of them like are actually not seeking proper help. They're not going to a registered dietitian. If you actually go to a registered dietitian and say, I want you to formulate a diet plan as a vegan, and here are some of the issues I have, they will give you help. I mean, even if they're not vegan, they will certainly provide help for a vegan who's just like trying to find a good diet plan. And a lot of times they'll just go to like naturopaths and a bunch of quacks. And the thing about these guys is that they provide that they will give you a diagnosis very easily, even without doing like a proper diagnosis. And they'll tell you what you want to hear. They'll say, oh, it's because you have leaky gut syndrome, which is like probably doesn't even really exist, and it's because of the fiber in your diet, yada yada yada. Now I do think there are some health conditions that make a vegan diet a lot harder for individuals, like if you have digestive problems like irritable bowel disease, then a vegan diet might be a little more challenging because it's because of the fiber content. But I think for the vast majority of populations who are living in the developed world, there really is no good argument against veganism. I mean, people say, well, you have to have like a B12 supplement, a vitamin D supplement. I mean, who gives a fuck? I'm not living in like some third world shithole. I can easily access a B12 and a vitamin D supplement, and it's actually pretty cheap for me to be a vegan because my staple foods consist of like rice, corn, beans, sweet potatoes, and I very rarely eat junk food, and I have no issue hitting like my macronutrient requirements. I get anywhere from like 3,600 to 4,200 calories per day. And there's professional athletes like Kendrick Ferris, who was on the U.S. Olympic weightlifting team in the last Olympics, as well as like NFL players who are following a vegan diet. So if they can follow a vegan diet, then there's no reason why these like anorexic basic bitches can't be on a vegan diet. It's just that they went full blown retard and then decided that, oh, I'm not just going to go vegan, I'm going to go raw vegan, and then they're going to try drinking their own piss, and they're going to try sun gazing, and then by the time it's all over, they're full blown carnivore. They're just never going to be satisfied because they always have to try something new. And the thing about veganism, it's not a journey, it's a destination. So if you're vegan, that's where it should end. And if you have issues with a vegan diet, it's important that you seek proper help and don't listen to bullshit online health gurus who recommend nonsense like the carnivore diet and other new age fads. So yeah, so I think that to sum up the answer is because it's because for ethical reasons. Like it's not even enough to tell me that like you can be healthy eating meat. I mean, I believe it is possible to be healthy with a small amount of animal products. It just you'd also have to convince me that somehow being a vegan is bad for my health, and that's a pretty hard case to make for me because my blood pressure is really good. I've been a vegan for like close to 17 years, and I've had no health problems as a result of it. I mean, I'm athletic. I'm in my late 30s. I'm stronger than a lot of people who are 10, 15 years younger than me. So, I mean, I very seldom get sick. So it just I mean, I can't find, and nobody can convince me why I should stop being vegan because I have no problems with it. And that actually goes and answers my next question. Somebody asked me, like, why do I think so many people fail on a vegan diet? And that's the reason why, is that I think people just don't get enough calories on their diet. And because they try like these new age, like poorly ill-advised variations of the vegan diet, like the raw vegan diet, and that's just not recommended for a lot of people in my opinion, just because like a lot of people just need more calories than could be adequately provided on a raw vegan diet. So let me see if there's anything else I can answer in the meantime. I know that there's a lot of questions I didn't get to that I would like to cover. um, um, I think that's going to be it for now, but I'm happy to create more videos like this in the near future. And if you guys have any other questions, if you think there's something I didn't cover in this video that I can cover more in depth, or just something new I can touch on, then by all means just let me know and I'll be happy to talk about it. Um, uh, in the meantime, thank you for watching this video, and I'll be back soon. Thank you.